All right, everyone. 2 days, two major victories for Trump. The other day, SCOTUS comes out, gives him his wall funding. Again, that comes with the caveat that he can't really, he can't use it for everything that he would want to right off the bat. There will be further legal challenges. The thing being, of course, having the ability to take money from the discretionary spending of the Pentagon is a huge boost to him optically, number one, and then number two, it will actually be for border defense, not just creating new wall, but also retrofitting existing wall, which is easier because there's already something there, as well as enhancing some of the other border security that we've got. So it's a huge victory. That's a partial fulfillment at the very least, even under the most black-pilled of interpretations of one of his major campaign promises, if not the most, which was build the wall, secure the border, stop the immigration crisis. It's funny because, of course, I've been sparring with people who are saying, well, Trump is sold out. He hasn't built enough new wall because the amount that's been built is underwhelming. Again, though, you've got to point out it wasn't until the other day that he had the funding, the will of SCOTUS behind him to actually do anything else measurable. So he was stymied completely. So now things can go forward at a quicker pace. But now he's got a second win, which is, of course, about a month ago, I think it was. They announced that they were going to try to achieve a deal with Guatemala to create a safe third country. Now, what this does is people from Point South, currently the only country, well, there are two countries in the hemisphere that accept asylum seekers, the U.S. and Canada. We, therefore, because of the structure of asylum law that the world generally agrees to, Western countries adhere to for diplomatic reasons, that means that anyone from South and Central America can come right into the United States and request asylum. Now, the thing is, of course, most of the people illegally here haven't done that. They haven't requested any form of asylum. They've either overstayed a tourist visa, in some cases, fly in, disappear into the crowd, or they've jumped the border. They never went through a port of entry. To claim asylum, you have to go through a proper port of entry. When Democrats say, well, these people, these asylum seekers, you shouldn't be kicking them out, they're refugees. They're not. Legally speaking, they never claimed asylum. They simply entered the country illegally. But putting that aside, because it's a more murky issue because of the fact that the legislature has no balls to actually enforce existing law, recognizing existing international law too with regards to refugee movements, they're not even doing that. They're not even enforcing the existing law that all the sellouts at the UN would want us to follow. Beyond that, we now have a safe third country. What this does is now that Guatemala has said, yeah, we'll accept asylum seekers, anyone from Point South or around Guatemala has to seek asylum there. They are no longer legally entitled to seek it here. Which is great, because now with Mexico also deploying additional resources around its southern border to slow down the movement of migrants, the problem is half solved, really, right then and there without an inch of new fence or a wall built. Really, the problem can be partially solved just by Guatemala accepting asylum seekers, because now anyone who wants to come in legitimately has to go there at least first. They can't come here and say, well, I'm going to seek asylum in the United States. They no longer have the ability to do that because Guatemala will take them. Now, some people are saying, well, Guatemala has its own problems. Guatemala's, there's high crime and stuff there, dude. It doesn't matter. It's still accepting asylum seekers. There's no caveat within international law for, well, but this country isn't that great as far as its economy goes. It's not so well off in first world, so it's okay if they just bypass it and come here. There's no caveat for that, so the left is lost completely. By the way, Guatemala better off than some of its socialistic contemporaries. It's better than Venezuela. There are jobs there. There's some degree of stability there. Plus, the U.S. is capable of helping fund the movement of people and their care and stuff. It's just we don't want to have to deal with it within our own domestic borders because we don't have a border wall. We don't have a fucking border. If we don't have a border defense system, then it makes it 10,000 times harder on us. Look, those ICE raids that were promised didn't net even a tiny fraction of who they were, and I speculated that would be the case, and this is why. What's happened in this country is that for the most part, people who have come here illegally, who know they're not valid asylum seekers, they're not refugees, they're economic migrants, or they've come in for other purposes. Some of them are gang members and shit. They're obviously not going to cooperate with ICE. Oh yeah, by the way, I'm here illegally in this country. Well, they've all gone to sanctuary states and sanctuary cities where they won't cooperate with federal law enforcement anyway. What did you expect to happen? The other thing, and this is another thing that I pointed out years ago. God, I think it was just barely 2015. The initial plan to mass deport millions of people will never work. I'll tell you why. And this is a bitter pill, this is a black pill to swallow for the people that are more nativistic than populistic. It can't happen because it would require the suspension of the U.S. Constitution's Fourth Amendment protections, fundamentally, and in many cases the Second Amendment, along the southern border. What you would be doing is telling the entire population, gun-toting as it is of places like Texas, hey, we're going to send armed dudes door to door, search your home from top to bottom. You're not going to have a say in this. There's not going to be any courts involved or anything. We're suspending the Constitution in order to find illegals. And we're going to demand your paperwork as well, so fuck you. You'd have to invade people's privacy on the most, fundamental level. You'd have to have checkpoints everywhere to catch people trying to flee by automobile. You'd have to have helicopters overhead to catch people on foot. You'd have to go door to door, city to city, on a mass scale in order to pull such a thing off. That's the fundamental reality of it. Because unless you can force a person physically to stand still long enough to process them, how are you going to determine that they're an illegal or not? It's impossible. You can't simply look at the person and say, oh, well, I think that this person has a sombrero. They're obviously illegal. We're chucking them across the border. Dude, the Ninth Circuit would crack down on it immediately. And again, Trump is not a bigoted, fanatic, and fascistic individual. If he were, he would just say, fuck the courts. He would have ignored the Ninth Circuit to begin with, built his wall with the Pentagon funding, and ignored the separation of powers, and then been impeached. See, there's the problem. The culturites want him to ignore the Constitution. I don't. I want to see some common sense reform here. I want the wall built. That's a good idea. The price is small compared to the payoff, even in the intermediate term. Build the wall. Safe third countries, great. Prop up Guatemala and taking legitimate asylum seekers. The third thing that I would do is I would try everything in my power to unseat these socialist tin horns around Latin America so that the economies of those countries would improve. Spread capitalism and libertarianism around the continent. Then those countries would be better off. We wouldn't have a lot of migrant movements. I guarantee the average person in Venezuela would rather be a Venezuelan with a job than an American without a job in a gray area status where the Democrats won't allow them to be deported, but at the same time they're not actually capable of doing much in the country. I guarantee that because before the economy of Venezuela got fucked by socialism, of course, there weren't a lot of refugees from Venezuela now, were there? Certainly not nearly as many as there are today. Some political asylum seekers, which you can argue are legitimate, but people weren't leaving for jobs. Why would they? They would work for the state oil company or something. They've got it made, or at least they thought so. So yeah, this is a big win for Trump, having Guatemala agree. For a while it was more tenuous. The Guatemala, I guess they pulled out of some meeting with Trump. Now they've said, yes, we've hammered out basically the final deal. Now it has to be ratified. The thing is, what it'll include, essentially, and they're not forthcoming about the full details. What it means is that Guatemala will accept asylum seekers. That's number one. Trump wouldn't be agreeing to it if it didn't. And number two, it will almost certainly have aid to Guatemala. Here's the thing, though. We rescinded a bunch of aid to Guatemala not long ago. It's just restoring the status quo for us. Again, Trump's master strategy, taking everything away from the other party and then, forcing them to try to get it back by giving you concessions, again has appeared to work. But we could pay him 10 times that much. It would still be cheaper than dealing with the problem on our own border. That's the tragic irony, is that the big spending Democrats and the rhino-cons have created a problem that's gargantuan in the expense, ultimately. It's funny to see so-called fiscal conservatives saying that it's terrible to pay a few billion for a wall when they're willing to pay tens of billions every year for people who are not legally entitled to even step foot in the country and in fact violate our laws every second that they're there. That's about all. Peace out.